Today's exciting topic will be best practices for auditing data in your PSA system. So we'll talk through that process. All right, why data audits? Why is this really a topic for today? Well, think of this. Life is simple. You get what you put in, right? I stole this quote from an inspirational quote. And if you swap the words, PSA is simple. You get what you put in. It sort of addresses what we want to accomplish today. For you to get the most out of your PSA, out of your open air environment, you really need to focus on, you get out what you get in, and making sure that you're putting in good data, that you're got good process and good procedures. Otherwise, then you're not going to have a good output of the system. So that's really what today's about, is really understanding what are the different areas where we can measure our PSA output by controlling the input. So if you need a reason to audit, here are several reasons. First and foremost, monitoring our adherence to process and policy compliance. You implemented your system, you determined the best practice for setting up OpenAir, and you trained your end users, and you spent a lot of time, energy, and money doing so. It's important to understand is, are we following those procedures? Are we adhering to the policies? As you all know, a PSA tool is the tool part of it is just a part of the overall solution. It's really about adhering to new processes, new policies, and making sure we're monitoring them to make sure we're getting the most out of our investment. So measuring adoption and compliance is very key to making sure you get that long-term success. Data accuracy and completeness. This is probably the one that everyone will most understand and most agree with, is that, are you getting good data in OpenAir and able to then control that good output? Or do you have a level of confidence in your completeness of your data? If you're tagging data elements like projects or customers with different, field tags for reporting purposes, are they being consistently set? Are they being set accurately? How do we make sure that our data is good so that we don't start running reports and realizing that our reports are inaccurate, and that's now putting doubt in the minds of everyone that the PSA is not doing its job. So it's critical that you're identifying those critical data accuracies elements and making sure that they are being followed. Change management adoption. This really follows the first bullet, process and policy compliance. It's the emphasis here is really about, the go live of your new system or the changes that you want to make in a new system. So Top Steps works with customers. We do implementation work. We also come in and work with existing OpenAir customers and recommend changes to OpenAir, changes to their process to get better efficiency. Well, those changes have to be measured, and they have to be managed along with your workforce to make sure that we're adopting those changes and adhering to those changes. So we'll talk a little bit about some more examples of that. But change management is a critical piece to any new system you put in, especially a PSA, because it touches so many people in your organization. System maintenance. So we've done some webinars where we've said, here's year-end maintenance or quarter-end maintenance that needs to be done that we recommend in OpenAir. Usually it's adding holidays to your work calendar, updating any costs at the user level that got any year-over-year increases, things of that sort. Well, there's other maintenance that can be done, that should be done to really help out the health of your PSA. So we'll talk about a few other items that are important. System maintenance actually can help save you money, and we'll talk about some examples of where that might be the case. And then last, but not least, auditors. Every organization is subject to auditors. And generally where we see auditors falling into is more of a financial realm of your financial systems, but also where OpenAir, impacts your financial systems, where potentially around revenue recognition process, percent complete, those types of things. So it's important to know where your potential auditing opportunities are in the system and make sure you're aware of all the feeds that those opportunities require for accuracy. So we'll take each one and we'll dive just a little bit deeper. Let's start with our process and policy compliance. Well, this is the one that we most hear from customers. It's near and dear to all of our hearts on this webinar. All right, I get it. You need my timesheet, right? The timesheet quandary of getting those in, getting them accurate, getting them timely, and getting them through the process. This is probably the most obvious example of adherence to a process and a policy. So it's important, to make sure we've got some of the popular policy metrics that we run into is, obviously timesheet compliance. What are our deadlines? How are we measuring our deadlines? Are we using reminders and out-of-the-box tools in the system to make sure that we have the best chance of adherence? Approvals. What are the approvals timelines as well, and are we adhering to those? So being able to manage those metrics, always looking to improve those metrics, those are obviously key metrics we help customers work on. Also important, a little more challenging, is expenses, right? So, it always surprises me that organizations have trouble getting timely expenses, especially when the resource is out of pocket, but it absolutely happens in every organization. And so you have to have good policy procedures there. Obviously you don't want a 6-month-old expense report getting submitted. And now, you've got cash flow, unpredictability, as well as you're impacting your ability to actually re-invoice those expenses if they're indeed billable. So having a good policy, being able to monitor those expense periods and controls, using reminders as needed, those are all kind of critical elements to being able to adhere to your expense policy. So let's talk about projects, right? So in OpenAir, you define what stages projects live in. Generally, organizations will create a planning stage, an active stage, a closed stage, maybe there's an at-risk stage, and are your projects moving along as you would need them to? Or you have projects inactive that should be closed? Do you have projects in planned where people are putting time in that really should maybe be at risk because you're missing a contract element? As well as not only just managing what life cycle stages is, using a health monitors. A lot of customers do like a red, yellow, green health monitor. Are we setting that correctly? So being able to audit and report and make sure and validate that your projects are following the defined procedures and moving from stage to stage. Your project managers or project owners are updating their projects with health tags as you've deemed the process to be. Keeping an eye on that and making sure that's as accurate is another key element of being able to get good output out of OpenAir. And last on this example list is resourcing. So obviously, do our resources, one, are they set up correctly? Are they assigned the right role? Obviously, roles are a critical element, filter sets, critical element within OpenAir. Making sure those are set up properly, the contractors are set up with the contractor role and so on, and making sure those roles are audited as well, and making sure that those roles have the right expected permissions for each of the different groups within OpenAir. So auditing those roles from time to time, making sure if any new functionality comes out, also important to audit the roles, and then just making sure that folks are set up correctly. If you have employees becoming contractors or contractors become employees, obviously making sure that that is managed properly. Data accuracy and completeness. So every time I meet with an existing OpenAir customer, I ask, what data are you tracking outside of OpenAir? Because really, anytime you get outside the system, it's really weakening the overall structure of the system. So, for example, if you're doing resource management outside of OpenAir because you either not sure how to do it in OpenAir, you didn't, didn't like the way it does it, I get it, but it's really weakening the power of the PSA and the return on investment that you are trying to get from your OpenAir system. So we really try to work with customers to try to make sure that that data is managed as much as is possible inside the system where it makes sense, so that we can, get that ROI of our OpenAir system, as well as having that one source of truth, one source of data that's feeding all the different organizations inside the system. So some of the usable audits that also double as metrics. Plan versus actuals for resource scheduling. This is a metric that we recommend to all our customers that are using OpenAir, and they're using the scheduling module to make sure people are scheduled correctly. And then we run reports weekly to see how did we do last week versus what did we plan versus what did we actually enter from time perspective. And you're looking for big gaps. I'm not looking for little gaps. I'm looking for where someone didn't work at all where they were expected to, or someone worked where they weren't expected to, and trying to understand those big gaps and the cause of those big gaps, and then make adjustments on those. So this is a critical audit, but it's also a great metric that you can measure to say what percentage of accuracy do we have using this data as points. And by having this be a very accurate metric, it feeds so many things. It feeds your FTE reporting, it feeds your forecasting. So it is really kind of that really important metric that feeds other important metrics. Project setup and completeness. How many of us have, you set up a project and, we didn't realize that within the SOW there was extra hours for this or that, so it's important to make sure if we're using OpenAir and you're managing your project budgets, budgeted hours at the project level, at the task level, budget dollars, that you're making sure that your project setup is complete and aligned with the statement of work, what was sold. And we also generally recommend baselining. So if you're setting those planned hours based on the SOW and then taking a baseline, you always have a place to go and see, okay, if we adjust the planned hours, what is that? How do we do versus what we actually expected to do? And that's a great opportunity to learn, to get better at your estimating process, and also understand strengths and weaknesses of your resources, taking expected time or taking too much time to complete certain tasks. Are we billing accurately? This can be a big customer satisfaction issue, and it can be a big time. It could be a big problem that takes a lot of time to solve. Making sure that your project is set up with the correct billing rates. And so, we want to, we don't want the customer coming back to us saying you billed me incorrectly. That's never a good thing. So, upfront, spending the time upfront, auditing the billing scenarios, billing rules against the SOWs, and is really a critical part of overall project setup that will pay dividends downstream. Change management. Change is hard. But delegating change is even harder. What does that mean? It means if I want to change myself, then I'm motivated to do so. And it's hard, but I am responsible for the change. Well, when we're putting in new systems, yes, we are changing, but we're also asking others to change as well. And that is the challenge that we all deal with as we go through life and as we work in the environments we work in, especially today in our current environment. So in order to make sure that we are successful being able to measure the adoption of these changes and be able to support audits of the changes. The change we're asking, is it being executed? And being able to have a definitive answer to that question is important. Otherwise, you're kind of just guessing as to whether your change is being adopted or not. So generally what we see is, if there's a hard date, starting on this date, we will be doing something different. If you're communicating that, whether you're implementing a new system or we're making a change to an existing process because we want to see improvement, maybe we're changing our timesheet due dates from Monday to Friday, we have to set expectations that we're going to be auditing the data, that we're going to be running reports, we're going to be monitoring OpenAir to make sure that these new processes are being followed. So it's important that not only do we have these new processes, but we have ways of monitoring, we communicate that out to the organization, and that it's important to the organization and why it's important to the organization. And then make sure it's an opportunity for improvement. Why are we changing our timesheet dates? Well, we want to be able to get out billing quicker. We want to be able to decrease our DSO rates. That's going to help the overall organization. So there's always needs to be a benefit downstream to all the folks that are affected by these changes. And we should have a metric in the system that we can point to that says this is going to be helpful. You're going to have better utilization or better forecast. We're going to have less timesheet problems, et cetera. So being able to have those metrics tied to the change management and being able to monitor and communicate that is also always key to being successful. And learn from the data. If you don't learn from the data, you're doomed to repeat problems. So make sure as you're putting in these changes, you're managing, you're running reports, and you're looking at the data and learning from the data. So data is your friend here. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Dig in and take those lessons and apply them to the organization. System maintenance. System maintenance can drive time and cost savings. Now that may sound interesting or funny, but if you have a well-maintained OpenAir system, and you really can save time and cost. So I'll give you a few examples. How many of us have forgotten to inactivate users once they're no longer needed in the system? And then you go to add a new employee and you don't have enough user license, so you got to add more, right? Making sure you're auditing your user licenses, that you actually have the right amount applied to the active users, the inactive users have been turned off. Having a process around that, having a periodic review of that will save you money. You won't have to buy new licenses. There won't be a delay in being able to bring folks into the system. So that's one example where system maintenance can be a big help. How about reports? Oh my gosh. We work with customers, and sometimes we go into the report module and there's hundreds, thousands of reports that have been there. And if you start to dig into those reports, many of them haven't been run in 6 months, a year, multi years. And there's been no maintenance. No one's been monitoring reports. People leave the organization. Unfortunately, it happens. They move on. Well, what about the reports that person owns? Let's go ahead and get rid of those reports or reassign those to someone if that's more appropriate. But keeping the reports clean, keeping them usable, they're usable and they're not confusing and they don't have this same naming convention. It's a very helpful way to cut down on the amount of time people are spending trying to find the right report and making sure the reports are valid as well. So another important maintenance opportunity. Auditing custom and standard field content. So I see this a lot when we start working with customers. And okay, we're gonna report on these values. And so we want, and for example, again, going back to like a project status, right? Red, yellow, green. And we want everything to default to green. So a new project gets created and everything defaults to green, everything's good. We're at the beginning of the project, everyone's happy. Are we actually updating the field throughout, right? Is every project green, or are you actually? So it's important to monitor the key fields to make sure if you are giving them a default value and that people are actually managing those fields and changing those fields when appropriate. Unused values. So we see this a lot too, where you get these long drop-down lists and only a subset of them are actually any longer used. So being able to clean up those drop-down lists, either by removing the values that aren't needed or hiding them or deactivating them if that's an option, being able to really keep your system nice and neat and clean, and making it easier on the end user to select the right values. Then we find a lot of fields are not even used at all. And they were deemed important when this tool was implemented many years ago, and today they're just noise. And so, reevaluating, I'm a big believer in making sure your project properties, your customer properties, they're clean. They only have the fields that are really needed, and we use form permissions to show the fields, control the fields to only the folks. So I'm not looking at a project properties where I'm seeing, hundreds of custom fields and, I'm only responsible for 5. So making sure that those are being managed properly and set properly. Our friends, the auditors. As professional services, we're mostly shielded from auditing, I would say, unlike our friends over in the finance teams. But we are subject to supporting auditors, where OpenAir impacts your financial system. So I call auditors frenemies. We can be friends and we can be enemies. Our goal would be to be friends. And in order to be friends, we have to understand what auditors are looking for and how that impacts how we set up OpenAir and how we maintain and run the OpenAir platform. Makes these data audits that benefit you. Make sure you know what you need to be keeping an eye on. For example, if revenue % complete is calculated in OpenAir and sent to your financial system, understand the back-end calculation. What is the % complete using? And then make sure that you're auditing on a regular basis that calculation is being managed correctly by your project managers and your resources. And then, when you get audited, then you'll have everything you need to be able to prove out that, your revenue recognition process is in order. If you don't do that, then you could be subject to, pain and problems of having to back into calculations that might be difficult to do so. Also, know your OpenAir capabilities for audit trails. I'm sure we're all familiar with the audit trails that you can include in reports, and being able to see in what in the system was changed, who changed it, and when was it changed. So the audit trails can give us all of that good information about what was changed. What it doesn't tell us is why. And why basically comes back to our different, process and compliance, policy compliance, our data accuracy, change management, maintenance, and auditing. So kind of brings us full circle as to, where we kind of started the presentation today. So in summary, tools like OpenAir are here to help you run your organization smoothly. Accurate reports obviously require accurate data. Metrics and measures, use them, define those that are beneficial to your organization, and then constantly be reviewing them. And then constantly be, looking at your configuration maintenance, data maintenance, keep your system clean, keep it uncluttered, and you'll get more out of it. You'll get a better return on your investment, and your end users will be more successful. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. I'm Ron. Appreciate you guys following Top Step and following our webinars. I see lots of familiar names on our attendee list. So thank you for your support.